the way we left it off in his last, the first part of the writing was, remember, his issue is with how you have any sort of causation between something that's sensed and the effect that it gives. So we're going to see how his skepticism is a little bit different than Descartes', but it doesn't mean that it fixes other, it leaves some things unsaid and then it fixes other things. Well, I'll leave it there. I don't want to get ahead of myself too much anyway. What I do want to say is this, let's just keep this in the back of our minds now, that overall, remember, Descartes wasn't a skeptic in the sense that he didn't believe you could know anything. I mean, it wasn't that like knowledge wasn't possible. He just wanted to be a skeptic till he can get to the point of what he knew certain. So once he could come up with, here's what I know certainly, then he could move out from that. So it was almost like skepticism was a method to get to where he needed to get. With Hume, a little bit different, right? Hume doesn't start with that same radical skepticism, but he's going to leave it that we really don't know, the connection between whatever the cause might be and the effect that we arrive at. So this isn't the type of skepticism that's, hyper dogmatic. There's no way you can know truth. A person goes through life almost like, concerned that they could ever come to a particular, valid conclusion on the purpose of something. It's not that type, nonetheless. All right. Now, when Hume starts to talk about this, great guy, he's pretty pragmatic, to be honest. He'll say, and we'll look at this again between the bread and such, right? He'll say the reality is that we don't absolutely know the cause. The connection between the cause and the effect. We see that bread, it has all the things that we know that bread would have that we can discern through our senses and through experience. It has the smell, it has the flavor, it has the taste, it has the texture, you name it, it looks like bread. And we find the secret powers to be that it's nutritious, so we get some sort of benefit from eating this bread. But we don't really know why those two are connected. And he says as long as you can imagine the opposite, then you have to have a certain amount of reluctance to say that we know that, with certainty. So, for instance, again, if somebody was so good at their craft, bless you, that they could absolutely put together a loaf of bread that had every quality about it except for its nutrition, and over the course of time we'd all eat it and realize we're getting no benefits from this absolutely, we would then have a different effect that followed the same cause. And that's where has him puzzled. Well, then how would we possibly know what the connections are between those? And he says, look, we really don't. There's just no ultimate reason that we can come up with that's going to tell us this always happens. But that doesn't leave him in a state of despair. He says, why would the sun come up tomorrow? He's relatively sure it will be because it's always come up. And why would he think otherwise? Why should he worry really about eating the bread and not having it to be nutritious? It's always been nutritious in the past. So on a certain level, you can understand like his acquisition of knowledge in this way is sort of pragmatic. What he says is that there's always a constant conjunction between these two things. And he doesn't have any real reason not to understand it that way. So like I said the other day, if you take a billiard ball and you drop it from chest height and it hits the floor, he wants to know why it's always going to do that. And that sounds kind of silly on first hearing to us because we're thinking, well, what else is it going to do? It's not going to float. But he doesn't know why it does this. He just knows that every time it does it, that's the effect that happens. So he gets to the point where I just rely on that. And we do this all the time in most of the things that we do. We expect certain things to happen. And it's because we've been trained that the cause is always, sort of initiated from the effect. But everything has to be from a previous experience or such, right? We'll talk about that more later. Make sure it's this habit. And remember, he said you can literally do this. Like if you want to drop a billiard ball 1,000 times, it's probably always going to hit the floor. He says that. It's not like he thinks he's trying to be clever. He even says you can absolutely search in vain for something other than that to happen. But can't you imagine it? And now it's the difference between these ideas and the matters of fact. You can't imagine a triangle with any interior angles collectively other than 180 degrees. There's no other thing to imagine. So he calls those things, the ideas, but they don't tell you much about the world. He says, just because I know the interior, collective, addition of the angles of a triangle, it never tells me that that triangle exists somewhere. So those ideas are good, but the reality is he wants to get to something else, and he doesn't know how to do it. All he knows is that he always sees this effect that follows some sort of cause, the conjunction between the two. It's just a habit that forms. And he's going to kind of leave it at that, all right? So he calls that the customary conjunction, right? This, though, is different. He starts to say, well, anyway, do you have any questions about that? Because that's really like a summary. There's not really anything there that I'm adding that I don't think we talked about yesterday or Wednesday. And to be honest, even though it's another section of his work, he's sort of just like reiterating, at least I would think, all right? He relies mostly on this custom to make sure there wasn't something in this. Yeah. No, just keep in the back of your mind that underneath all of this, even though the custom establishes this, it always is based on experience. In other words, a child is never going to think that a flame is hot until they get burned. So, if you were a kid, like, do cars still have lighters? No? All right.
I remember one.
So, yeah, they're like the little, yeah, you push it in and it pops out and then it's like glowing red.
Yeah.
Well, growing up, the car had 2 or 3 of them. So if you were in the back seat and nobody wore seat belts and there was no children, you just kind of like sat back there, we would play around with that all the time. And I remember as a kid, I screamed because the thing looked red, but why would I associate red with being burnt? I mean, I had no experience. So I pushed my thumb on the thing and then had one of them moments, right? It's like all of a sudden now I'm feeling pain and I'm screaming and you could see the outline of the coil. Remember, it was like a coil on my finger, Well, these were the days before they worried about it. My mom said, well, now you don't have to do that again, don't you? And that was the end of it, that type of thing. But after that point, even if I saw one that was popped out, and I probably would do it today, you tap it just to make sure this thing's not hot because you've had a previous experience. But without the experience, I have no way to do this. And if you remember from Monday, it was the same thing with the shades of blue. You're never going to know what navy blue is compared to, say, powder blue unless you've had the experience of those colors. But he says, if you did put all these colors on a spectrum, you could come up with something by saying there's a gap between these two. Like I can envision something between these 2 colors. So that seems to say that I am knowing something without experiencing it. But his point is, no, you've experienced something you're comparing it to. You can never get around that. And remember, if a person was blind from birth and had no experience of blue, how would they know what it is? I'd be curious. I mean, I'd start looking that up. I mean, how do they manage to explain colors to people who are born blind? I'm sure they have some method. Who knows? I don't know what that would be. Maybe it's, well, if they're probably blind, I don't know. Anyway, I think with shades of gray, at least they could probably get away with something. All right. Now, here's the thing. Part of his project is it's very important to have an imagination because we can't experience everything. So someone said about, getting hit by the car when you're a young kid. It's not an experience that you have. So how can you possibly know that's going to hurt? So I had to go home and told my wife, I said, hey, I actually used your example of, the car bites because most people have that sense of biting. But you have to transfer something, right? So even if you tried, if you didn't want to use about car biting, you have to say, I don't know, maybe a younger cousin or something threw something at you. Hey, did you like when you got hit, with that ball? No, well, that hurts a lot worse than that. But see, Hume's point is, see how you started with an experience? You found something that you can then extrapolate from that with your imagination. But even in the imagination, it doesn't just come from anything. There has to be something there. You can't imagine something you haven't previously experienced, because his whole point is that the mind is a tabula rasa. It's a blank slate. things get written on this. But the only things that can get written on it are experiences or things that we can extrapolate from those experiences. So they're all listed as these ideas and judgments that we have. All right. Now, the problem is how do I know these ideas that I haven't directly experienced? It's one thing if I stuck my finger in a car lighter and I got a burnt from that. But there are other things that I can imagine that I didn't necessarily experience, and I've extrapolated from other things I experienced, but how do I know those things aren't just figments? He starts to talk about it and say, well, that's a concern. So you can see he's not having a flat-out inner dialectic, but he's trying to foresee some issues with what he's coming up with here. And he's saying, I don't know the difference. In other words, I think he said in there he can imagine an enchanted castle. Well, did anybody here ever experience an enchanted castle? I mean, what would that be? So how does he know that that thing is real? All right? He does come up with some plan on this. He's going to say that we have beliefs, and our beliefs are really centered on how we form these ideas. Okay, so are matters of fact, are these things built into ideas? I'm sorry, and the ideas actually come from things that we know a little more certain. Maybe I shouldn't use that word. I hope I'm not conflating two things in your mind here. But you have to understand, it's probably best to think of his idea of belief on a spectrum. There are some things that we can have stronger beliefs on, and there are things that we can have weaker beliefs on. And he's trying to say, well, how will I know? In other words, I don't want to put my belief into something that's just purely imaginative. So how am I going to know the difference between these two things? He talks about resemblance and proximity. Did anybody pick up on what he was talking about there? I think some of the stuff, if it wasn't as super clear in the book, I think it's the stuff that we all share experiences. Anybody said about resemblance? The voices in the other room, right? So, in other words, again, keep in the back of your mind that everything is epistemology, empiricism, and it's all based on experience. Yes?
Wasn't it like resemblance is basically like your first experience with it? You don't have any resemblance.
That's right. So if you heard a voice in the next room, and say it was, your friend from high school or something, it's only based on a previous experience that you have of that person, right? So if we're sitting here and you hear somebody in the next room talking, you might start thinking, that sounds familiar. It has a resemblance to a previous experience. Okay, now get what he's trying to do here. He's trying to distinguish between things that could be purely fictitious and imaginative, and things that are his imagination putting together some assimilation from previous experiences that are real. So if we're talking about reality here, he's trying to work out how I know that thing's really there. So he hears the voice in the next room and he thinks to himself, that sounds like a friend of mine. There's something there that's a resemblance, and the level of that resemblance is going to also talk about the strength of the belief. Okay? Like, how would you believe something? Well, that's going to connect those two things. So what he says, though, is you have this idea. Now, we've used that word a bit, right? And if you go all the way back, to Plato, remember the ideas are outside the cave. They're those things that exist in perfection, but in another realm. And then you have, Aristotle that says, well, no, those ideas don't exist on their own, but they're universal, and they have to be only in a particular. And Augustine might even talking about, the light of God, illuminating those. Well, he's like, these ideas are there per se, but they don't exist somewhere. So we're going to talk about that at the end of this. But he'll say it gets enlivened. In other words, I must have had this idea of my friend, and it's in there. If we want to call it in the memory fund. And the minute that I heard what sounded like the voice, because it resembled that, it enlivens this idea. And the closer that voice is to the memory that I have, the idea of this, the stronger that I can make the connection that this is an honest belief and not one based on simply an imaginative thing. Because we could always, sometimes, let's face it, did you ever see somebody who looks like a friend of yours, and if you're like me, I'm an artist, so, my wife think I was weird. We would sit in the mall, I'm the stereotypical guy that sit in the mall and they do whatever. I have $3 to go out shopping and I'm just sitting there. And my wife would come back and she'd go, I know what you're doing. You were like looking at features, like pulling out like, you know, ears or eyes. I'm like, yeah, well, anybody who does any drawing or stuff, you're always looking over distinctions. And my wife's like, people are gonna think you're a creep. You know, what are you sitting there like looking, everybody walking by, that type of thing. So that's what I do. If you think you know somebody, it's like, you think if you stare at them long enough, something's gonna like trigger there, right? Well, I thought about that with Hume. Hume would say like something being alive in there. Fortunately, mine's, you know, deep a little bit and I gotta wake it up. But that's what happens. And the closer, you know, resemblance that is to the memory, the idea we have, the stronger than the belief, yeah, that's my friend out there. I know it sounds just like them. I know it's them. But that's still not entirely strong, right? So he also talks about the proximity. You know, in other words, these are where the ideas become the most intense. So how long ago, perhaps, you know, did you see your friend? Maybe we can talk about the strength of the memory. Oh, I don't think that's really what he's talking about per se. Now, you guys haven't been away from home for so long, but maybe you lived somewhere else and it's been a while since you've been there. Or maybe you like going on vacation to a particular place and you haven't been there in a while. Like, what would trigger the memories of either like a hometown or of your favorite place to go on vacation? Like, you ever hear like the beach? Okay, so if you're not at the beach, what triggers the memories of that? The smell. So where would you hear this? Where would you smell that smell here? Like maybe the rain or something like that?
Yeah, or like.
Oh, okay, yeah. Like, and they're actually making a sense that it's like that.
Also, like crashing noise.
Oh, okay, yeah. So these things, like, they bring it up, right? So I know, again, here I go with the bread. It's like just seeing that bread, it puts me back in the old neighborhood, you know, and I can almost picture sitting at this, you know, little table with my mom, and she said, we're getting ready to eat, go get some bread. I run down, I get some bread, and so like if you're in your old neighborhood, all these things just sort of like, it doesn't just enliven them, they become intense. It's almost like you could almost like relive them. And you know, and it's not just like a pure nostalgia, although I think it's partly there. He's saying it's the fact that it's the resemblance combined with the proximity here that's really giving you the most intense distinction that what you are having is a genuine idea from your imagination, because of course that's from imagination, right? And it's not just something that's purely fictitious or have there, like this is fiction, right? It's something that I truly and really experienced. He says you can't do that really with like an enchanted castle. You know, we all can all, and by the way, even there, unless we had some vision of a castle in the past, either you went there, you know, on a field trip, or you just looked at photographs, we have an experience of a castle. And we've probably watched either something in Disney or we've read, you know, some book where there's magic and such. So we can actually take those two things and we can put them together in our imagination. So that's what he's talking about, limited and unlimited. So the imagination is limited to the extent that we can only use things that we've previously experienced. But it's unlimited in the sense that as long as we've experienced something, there's almost an ad infinitum array of you guys, is that my... There's an unlimited array of combinations that we can make, okay? So we can have vivid imaginations. And if you think about this, this is pretty good for us, especially for people that are into like civil rights and activism. Because if you don't have some semblance of hope, like in another course I was teaching, they were talking about this these people down in Peru that are so oppressed, the women actually form fabrics where they can envision like almost like a more ideal world. So they'll make these, you know, they don't have adequate housing, they don't have adequate food, but their imagination is what compels them to hope and so much see the future. Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream. You couldn't say something like that if you didn't have some sort of imagination. But all the humans step in and say, yeah, but it's only because he has an experience himself. Martin Luther King Jr. has seen it somewhere, And they can take that and put those things together. So in that sense, our imagination is absolutely unlimited. But that was part of his concern, though. It could be unlimited to the point where I no longer know if what I'm really imagining is fiction, or if it's just, a reality semblance. But that's why he was using resemblance and proximity. Those things help. So we may have a vision or imagination of what an enchanted castle is. There's no enchanted castle. It's purely fictitious. But we're able to put it together because of the things we've experienced castles, and we've experienced instances where we at least, even if we don't see the magic, we understand what they're doing there. And we put those things together. But nonetheless, it's these three things together, if you want to call it that, that make it necessary for us to have what he would call a pre-established harmony. All right? And this is where, at some point, somebody might ask the question, this doesn't really help us. You said that we had pretty certain ideas of the mathematics, but it really didn't tell us that thing existed out in the world. But then when it comes to these matters of fact, they're based on our sensory experiences that we don't necessarily could put our finger on how the cause and effect are related. And he said we can talk about the strengths of the belief. In other words, I'm going to have a belief in this, but only to the extent that I can come up with some sort of semblance of the resemblance and the proximity. And somebody might say, but that's really a problem, because that doesn't tell me what I want to know. And he's like, what we have here is an established harmony. And he's like, what's wrong with that? He says, do you really, even if you can, understand the opposite of a billiard ball not hitting the floor, we haven't experienced yet where it hasn't. Right? So just don't worry about it. It's almost like it gets pragmatic at this point. Yes, we can conceive the opposite, where the properties of bread that we sense could not contain the super aspects of it, nutrition. But nobody here has experienced that. So don't worry about it. There's a pre-established harmony, and this is really how we get through life. And it may sound like, well, but does that make us look like we're sort of like dim-witted and not asking hard questions? He's like, no. There's no way for you, and this is where he'll wind up. There's no way for you to make that connection between cause and effect. And if that destroys your world, then it shouldn't. Because there's this pre-established harmony that always seems to work. And that's going to have to be good enough for you. We wake up every morning. The sun rises and sets every day. You know what? We can't come up with the exact connection, but that being said, it still happens. So what happens is, nonetheless, I think there was something else. All we do is we always have these expected similar outcomes. Every time we get in the car, we turn it on. Every time we start driving down the road, the thing moves. We can see the opposite of all of these things happening. And then those things are mechanical, understanding mechanical failure. But nonetheless, we shouldn't have those types of concerns. It's a pre-established harmony. The fact that these things, we always expect similar outcomes, that then reinforces our belief. So our belief is based on the continuous strength of the experiences and the fact that we always see that effect come from the cause. We have no idea necessarily the connection between the effect and the cause, but we also don't have a lot of reason to doubt it. So enjoy the harmony, go on with life. You have a sense to believe that, but you can see kind of the scientific method here. We do that the same way, right? I mean, don't think I'm anti-evolution, I'm not, but we haven't quite figured out how some of that works. You can't be so pretentious to think that we know. There's been variations over the time, like if, you can study landmarkers on, you guys ever hear of punctuated equilibrium? Sometimes there were gaps in the fossil record. So Stephen Jay Gould wrote a theory in the 60s about punctuated equilibrium, saying, well, maybe there were like jumps or leaps. In other words, we don't see gaps because there's nothing missing. It just happened that there was some sort of event that advanced it to a point where it looks like there should be something here, but there really isn't. Right? And there's other types too. We don't quite know. We know that we're onto something, but we don't quite know. But nobody really shouldn't, because of that, doubt evolution overall. We just kind of leave it. So there's many things probably that we do with this. And again, I think I said about medicines per se. There's still medicines, and the one I know is MS. So people with multiple sclerosis are going to be taking some particular injection or such. They don't know why it works. All they know is that it staves off any exasperations per se and doesn't allow new lesions to form as quickly. But if you had to pin them down, they'd say, we don't know. And they may never know. Or they may find out in 50 years. It's hard to say. That type of thing. But we don't sit there and doubt it. All we're doing is we're expecting the same outcome. And you and I do this all the time, right? I mean, if I take, acetaminophen or something, or naproxen sodium, I don't know what this whole thing works, but I take it and I don't have the same headache. So I don't really get the connection between the cause and effect, but until I'm going to get a different effect, I'm not going to question the cause. So there's a skepticism there, but it's not a dogmatic skepticism where I'm doubting everything. The only thing that I'm doubting is that this is absolute, and then perhaps that I can say I have any certainty about what those two things are, or how they go together. You kind of get that? Okay, now let's see if we can't do something with the discussion, because what happens then is if we have this mind and body, okay, what did Descartes say? I don't care what you think about it. What did Descartes say was at least the idea of the connection between the mind and the body? Remember what he said? Okay, and then what was the connection he thought? Like in the brain, like there was a gland, the pineal gland, right? So they're always trying to come up with this connection. What connects these two things? I know this may sound silly, but this is consciousness. What makes my finger move when I tell it to move? I mean, these are not easy things. And the more neuroscience tries to get into it, it seems like we don't know as clearly as we think we might know. So with Hume, we have other, he's asking it's sort of the same question. So we may have an effect where an effect where I raise my hand, but how does the cause work? If you say my mind did it, well, what does that mean? I mean, you're saying the same thing he's saying. You're just saying, well, the mind does it, but you have no idea the connection between the two. And he says, okay, you want to start talking about all the nerves and everything else? Okay, but how does that work? How does an immaterial mind stimulate an electrical impulse for this whole thing to start? We don't walk around, I don't know about you, but I've never worried about, I don't know if I'm going to be able to lift my finger tomorrow. It's always happened, But we just sort of assume that this is how things are going to be. And he'd probably say that's exactly what I mean. You just have this harmony that's always worked for you. You always have the expected outcomes. There's a proximity and resemblance, so that your belief is very strong. And you shouldn't doubt it. Because you'll probably, unless there's some sort of neurological damage, the reality is that you would try in vain for that not to happen. Okay? But don't forget, too, they had a little concern about what do you do when you have, say, like the people with limb dysphoria, is that a memory going awry? Is it an understanding that, it seems like it's there, but it's not mine? Nothing really solves. But how did Descartes, who did Descartes, when he wanted to get to, well, let me see the next thing, the self. When Descartes said, I want to experience who I am, what did he conclude? What was the one thing that Descartes can say was him? This one's an easy one. He's a thinking being. He can come to that conclusion. How do you do that with Hume?
He experienced the outside world.
Okay, but you might what do you experience of the outside world with your body?
All the senses.
All the senses, right? So if you hit your finger with a hammer, you experience this. But does that really get to the eye? How do you experience selfhood? In other words, what you're experiencing are, he calls them, let me make sure I didn't put it up there. Yeah, I did. He says you really can't get too much farther than a bundle of these perceptions, or a bundle of these perceptions, I think is the best way to say it. In other words, you can hit somebody on the foot and that can hurt, but does that mean does that reveal the person, the I? He's going to say, I don't know. he's going to say, you can't get any farther than this. But I don't know if that really sits well with me. I mean, Descartes got the other way, and he said, well, I know who I am because I'm the thing that doubts. And as long as I'm doubting, I know that I exist. But he's going to say, as long as you hit my finger, am I going to say the same thing? I felt pain, so therefore I exist. It doesn't quite have the same, tone to us.
So both Descartes and Hume believe the self is bodiless.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't think but see, how do you experience something that's bodiless when you're an empiricist? Because you can't have an experience of something that's not observable. I mean, you ask a good question, but that's his dilemma. Everything about me, if I'm going to start out with the premise that only things that I know are going to be things that I can experience through my senses, you can't sense the person. You can't sense the eye. You can't even say, well, I'm in there somewhere. And if you say, well, I'm in there somewhere and I'm a mind driving the body around, that's not going to help you. So he says all we really are is just a bundle of all these perceptions that we have, but that really doesn't tell us who we are per se. And it doesn't really help somebody who might have limb dysphoria. The leg's not even there. You're still saying that it's there. Or for the person who has body integrity disorder and doesn't want to. I mean, that almost will start to confuse the whole thing. Well, there's no answer really. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that as we studied some of the various epistemologies, and then we started looking about how those epistemologies can affect the reality, they have conclusions that you have to draw to be intellectually consistent. You can't just default and say, but I like Hume, I like his idea, but I'd rather just think that I am in there. You can't do that. I mean, if you're going to use his method, you got to use his method. You can't just jump all over, right? Because people do that. Like, so if I do like nursing ethics somewhere, right? It's like, next semester I'm doing it here, but elsewhere, I can go through all the various philosophers. Here's how Immanuel Kant would do ethics. Here's how John Locke would do ethics. I go through everything. And then when I ask a question, everybody falls back to the default position. Well, here's what I think. It's like, yeah, but you're all over the board. Okay, so if you think that, then what about this? Well, that's okay. I don't see a contradiction. Well, because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. You gave me two different standards. You really can't do that. It's not being intellectually honest. So with Hume, so you can see if you are a strict materialist, right? If you are an atheist materialist and this is your understanding of the human person, that only things that I can weigh, only things that I can measure and such and sense, those are the only things that are real for me, that everything else is going to fall into the realm of fictitious imagination. And you don't have a good way around that. So things that you can't weigh is, okay, so this is where you'll see, well, let's do this. I'm trying to get at is that this is going to affect your understanding of who the human person is. And really, that's the beginning of most things in ethics. If you're going to have an ethics, and you're talking about ethics of the human person, per se, you better have an understanding of who this human person is. And then you're going to move out from that. And also, you're going to have some understanding of, how that plays out. So, how would Hume's ethics play out? Since, what does this mean if I'm a bundle of perceptions, and you're bundles of perceptions, then what is our relation? What kind of ethic would you even start with that? Immanuel Kant might say, well, you should never will something that you can't universally will for others. So I don't want you to lie for me, and I don't think it'd be good if I lied to you, so we're going to declare that lying is wrong universally. Don't do it. And it doesn't even matter if you get any happiness from it. That's not the point. The point is that we found a universal, duty, deontological point that we can move from. If you go back to Aristotle, he's going to talk about virtues and such, right? We can go on and on. But when you start to get into people like this is why you see some conflicts between science and the way that it's used in society. Because there's no real way for science to measure what it's doing ethically. It can only really measure what it's able to do. and I'm not saying scientists aren't ethical, don't take it that way. All I'm saying is that you stick to that strict empiricism, you get yourself kind of locked in, and you will only ask, what am I able to do? Now, what they probably will come up with, and this is where you hear the term, they would have used it back then, like a web of sympathy. You know, in other words, if you're a bundle of perceptions and I'm a bundle of perceptions, there's not necessarily like a nature there that I can put into it. Because remember, Plato thought there was a nature to something. So if it's over there, whatever a toaster is, that's the perfect toaster. Whatever a human is, that's the perfect human soul, and somehow we are relating to that. You know, Aristotle can talk about in terms of happiness, what's good for human flourishing. So if we can find out what's good for human flourishing, then we can try to direct your actions by virtue into the good for human flourishing. You know, Mill and some other guys, Bentham, might talk in terms of, well, let's do what's best for the largest amount of people. That seems to be a good thing, you know. But he's not going to be able to give that same type of ethic, because his understanding of the human person is this bundle of perceptions. So the best that we can do is realize that we kind of each have these bundles. So you create this web of sympathy where you try your best to not give somebody else a bad experience and you give them a good experience.
You do whatever makes you happy, because in theory, helping other people makes you happy. So
Yeah.
That's like what he said.
Yeah, because it comes down to it, and I think if you stretch it a little farther, it's like you stretch your happiness to the point where it won't affect their happiness. So, but that's what I kind of mean, like a web of sympathy, right? So we see this, like, now the thing of it is you can send it to animals too. So, you know, it's cute, like what my daughters are always, one of my daughters could be, if she wasn't married with 2 kids, she'd be the crazy cat lady, living by herself with 15 cats, right? So she posts everything on Facebook about, you know, these little rats. You know, rats, did anybody ever have a pet rat? Nobody had a pet rat. They're cool, stinking pets. You had a hamster? Sorry, rats are smarter. I'm not trying to be, you know, there's probably some ism there that I just committed. But nonetheless, rats are brilliant. I mean, so, you know, we were told about this, like when my kids were young, and, you know, a rat's a rat. I don't want a damn rat in my house, right? So my middle daughter, this is probably when she was like in 6th, 7th grade, she put together a presentation. I'm talking board, an easel board and everything. And I told her, you're not getting a rat. I don't care what presentation you get. So she goes, well, I'll present, and then if you like it, you can get a rat. If not, we'll drop it. Fair deal. She blew me away. When she showed me, and do you know you can get rats to go in the litter boxes? I started talking to other people. They said, we keep them in the kitchen. They are the cleanest, you know, rodent that there is. We don't think that, right? Because we're used to, like, you know, spend time in New York, the New York sewer rats, things like cats, right? But they're that clean. So I almost had to, like, change, like I'm thinking of Hume, I almost had to change my experience so I can understand it. And I believe her. So anyway, she'll still send, you know, like photos of these, like, little, like what the one rat had, like a little pouch. And it could literally go in its pouch and grab something and then eat it. All right? But, you know, the reality is, we extend that web of sympathy to them because we almost personify ourselves into that, right? We watch way too many Disney movies, and we think these things are just walking around and they can almost talk. But if this were in the day of the bubonic plague, or if we still thought they might be disease-carrying animals, we wouldn't think twice about ending that. You know, we're not going to have that thing causing an issue in our health, right? So the web of sympathy, or, you know, this level of emotion that Hume would have, it has its limits. And you know, Hume's an unpopular philosopher. And by unpopular, I'm not saying people don't like him. It's just nobody really writes about the guy in a modern way. You don't see, I mean, you'll hear a lot of Immanuel Kant. He's not a name you hear. And from why most people think that is because he's so basic and practical. I mean, there's nothing like, you know, there's nothing sexy here that sells. I mean, it's not like he broke some new thing. He just says, look, you know, there's only so much we can know about the world. You know, we have these, you know, ideas, and we have experiences, and we can use our imagination and put them together, and we can differentiate between the fictitious one and the actual ones. And in the end, we're going to have an effect that came from a cause. We're never really going to make the connection between the two. But I don't think you should worry about that so much because it really does create a harmony. And we're always really worried about these expected outcomes and we build our beliefs off of that. I mean, it just sounds like, yeah, it sounds right to me, you know, and you move on. And there is a lot of things that are right about that. But my point is that, you know, once you build off of these things, because if you're trying in your life, you're going to try to figure out exactly how you know the world. And you're going to try to develop some ethic. And hopefully your ethic won't just be what you're thinking that day, right? So you're going to try to develop some ethical code, and you're going to think, how do I live by this? And then once you start applying that across the board, you're going to start to see where the issues rise. Well, with him, it'd be an understanding of the human person. Why be virtuous? And you might be virtuous because of the happiness it brings you, but he's not even talking about the happiness in the same way that the ancients are, per se. So anyway, what are you guys thinking, Hume? Any opinions? Did you like it? Is it a little easier to understand than some of the other stuff, do you think? Yeah. Did those $1,000 graphics up there help at all? Yeah, it took me 5 seconds to find that on Google. I mean, it's not copyright. Okay. Anything on this? Okay. I'm here if anybody wants to talk about the paper or anything.